Okay, is everyone on? 1, 2, 1, 2. Oh, that needs to be a bit more boost. Hey, how you doing, guys? Whew, yeah, I'm on a bit early today, 2 o'clock. Yeah, thought I would just come on and see who is about and do something because you know what, I get bored if I don't do things. So I am here today because I have actually been promising to do a couple of reading things. And just, you know what? I plan to do them in the evening, bedtime. You guys all get to go to bed listening to my glorious tones. And oh my goodness, I must have got old because, yeah, I've been too tired to do it at night. Well, last night, I've got to be honest, we had a nice fire. And I'm sorry, fire overrode all ideas of sitting and reading. One moment, Hamish, you need to sit down. You need to stay down. My studio dog's in here with me today, folks, and he's a little bit hey big guy. He's a little bit jumpy today. I think he wants out and he can't get out because I've now started. So sit, lie down. Come on, lie down. Down. Hey Pupper, down. Good boy. Oh, you're such a good boy. Down. So yeah, basically one of the weird things that I always get comments of, and as I say, I get this weird thing where people sometimes come up to me after a show or after they listen to something and go, "Oh, I could just listen to you all day." Or one of my favorite ones is I could listen to you reading the telephone directory. Now, I love that idea, but I don't know the legal implications of reading the telephone directory. I don't know if that could get me into a lot of trouble. So I basically thought about this and thought, you know what? Well, I can't read the telephone directory because that might be dangerous. Maybe a yellow pages, a dated yellow pages. And I promise you one day this, folks, if I can find out the legality of it, I may just do a fringe show called Calum Lykan Reads the Yellow Pages or a phone directory and just see if anyone comes to it. And if they don't, then I'll be calling them out because they told me they would. But anyway, I thought I would start doing kind of a couple of series shows where I'll read. Literally, I'm just going to read. It's not storytelling. But it's kind of like, it gives you that option at night. If you're not able to sleep, you can put on a story and fall asleep. So I thought I would start with one of my favorite books. And it is my favorite book of all time. And it is this one. I need to get the angles right because of this light. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Because if I'm going to read anything, I better read Scottish because it makes a little bit more sense with the language than me trying to read, say, Shakespeare or anything. So I thought I would start with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And I was just planning on maybe doing a chapter, 2 chapters a day, just to kind of work through it. And also just for fun. It gets me also in the habit of doing narration because it is a part of the work that I am slowly trying to break into, which is voiceover and narration work. So this just kind of gives me the option. So if everybody is sitting comfortably, if everybody has their cups of tea ready, I'm just checking how mine's doing. Lovely. If everyone has their studio dog, now peaceful. And I'm going to do this, folks. Yeah. I'm putting on my reading glasses. Yeah, I got old. It happened. Now, what I am going to say is, although Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is one of my favorite books, I haven't read this in a while. So this is going to be pretty much a raw reading for me. So it's going to be quite funny. So I'm not even going to declare it's going to be perfect. But what I like about this Robert Louis Stevenson book is it also has the Body Snatcher, the Bottle Imp, one moment. Hamish, be quiet. Stop your grumbling. Studio dog is in a mood today, folks. And it also has the Weir of Hermiston. Hamish. This is going to be a fun reading, folks. He has been, my dog Hamish, I don't know who's actually, Mike's on, I see you there. Mike's met Hamish. And a few other people have, but Hamish has started to become a very grumbly pup. He gets nervous at any noise and he starts whining and talking. Honestly, if I didn't know better, I'd say he had husky in him, but we know he doesn't. Really? Are you talking back to me now? We're not starting this, Hamish. Okay? There are no cookies for you in this studio. Let us begin this reading with this. Oh, hey, Dan. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, the Museum of Edinburgh. That was a while ago. Oh, wow. That was a long time ago. So let's begin at least a chapter of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The weird thing is I'm going to have to kind of be looking away from the camera, which is so against it. But I'm going to even start with the introduction because most people will know Robert Louis Stevenson. But Robert Louis Balfour Stevenson was born on the 13th of November, 1850 at Edinburgh, Scotland. That's a weird way to put it. At Edinburgh, Scotland. Should be in Edinburgh, Scotland. In childhood, he began a lifelong battle with tuberculosis. Despite poor health, he attended Edinburgh University, where he studied engineering and law. In 1875, Stevenson was called to the bar, but then followed a career in letters. I love that. A career in letters. His earliest writing consisted of short stories, essays, and travel logs. This last area being related to the constant search for a climate that would suit his rather fragile condition. Yes, I know how that feels, Robert. Stevenson's first popular success came with his debut novel, Treasure Island. Now, if Treasure Island is in the public domain, I actually have a copy back in Scotland, a beautiful hardback copy with gorgeous ink drawings through it. I would be reading that if I had that as well, because Treasure Island, if you've not read it, tremendous. Popular reference would be The Muppets Treasure Island, a wonderful movie complementing Robert Louis Stevenson's writings. Treasure Island, 1883, A Tale of Pirates and Lost Treasure. Amongst his other better-known works are the poetry collection A Child's Garden of Verses, 1885, and the adventure novels Kidnapped, 1886, and The Master of Ballantrae, 1889. Stevenson's novella, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, 1886, with its exploration of split personality, is considered to be amongst his darkest writing. Its stature as one of the great classics in literature tends to overshadow much of his other writing in horror and supernatural genres, including The Body Snatchers, Markheim, and The Bottle Imp, presented in this volume. So these are ones that I will also be reading for you at some point. Stevenson was a mere 44 years old when he died on the 3rd of December, 1894. Yet he left a large body of work, including 9 novels, 4 short story collections, 4 books of poetry, and numerous volumes of non-fiction. At the time of his death, the author was writing 2 novels, one of which was Weir of Hermiston, the works published in its incomplete form 2 years later. Sorry, I stuttered there because I was just thinking he died when he was 44. I'm 43. I haven't even done half the stuff this guy's done. There's not much hope for me. Oh, I'm finding my throat's in a funny mood today. Anyway, folks. Starts talking at the... Yes, Mike, that is so true. Okay, so if you're sitting comfortably, let's at least get through the first chapter of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson, one of my favorite books. Hamish. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this a straight face with this whiny dog in the studio. Come here. Come here. What's bothering you? We will start in a moment, folks, once I've calmed this whiny boy down. Come on, sit down, lie down, settle down, settle down. Okay, let's see if we can get through this. I do, yes. Okay. Story of the Door, Chapter 1. Mr. Utterson, the lawyer, was a man of a rugged countenance that was never lighted by a smile. Cold, scanty, and embarrassed in discourse, backward in sentiment, lean, long, dusty, dreary, and yet somehow lovable. At friendly meetings, and when the wine was to his taste, something found its way into his talk. I'm just checking that. Yeah. I jumped a line there, folks. I need to adjust my lighting, I've discovered. See, I didn't prepare properly for this, did I? Let's try that one again. At friendly meetings, and when the wine was to his taste, something eminently human beckoned from his eye, something indeed which never found its way into his talk, but which spoke not only in these silent symbols of the after-dinner face, but more often and loudly in the acts of his life. He was austere with himself, drank gin when he was alone, to mortify... Honestly, the punctuation in this book always throws me when I'm trying to read it aloud, folks, because it really is crazily done. Yes, thank you, darling. I love you too. Yeah, my wife is actually laughing at me trying to read this. And literally, I love this book, but I've never tried to read it out loud, folks. So I'm actually enjoying the fact that I'm like, oh my God, this is just crazy. The way they've actually put some of this together with the language, and I love it. He drank gin when he was alone to mortify a taste for vintages, and though he enjoyed the theatre, had not crossed the doors of one for 20 years. But he had an approved tolerance for others, sometimes wondering, almost with envy, at the high pressure of spirits involved in their misdeeds, and in any extremity inclined to help rather than reprove. I incline to Cain's heresy, he used to say quaintly. I let my brother go to the devil in his own way. In this chapter, it was frequently his fortune to be the last reputable acquaintance and the last good influence in the lives of down-going men. And to such as these, so long as they came about his chamber, he never marked a shade of change in his demeanour. No doubt the feat was easy to Mr. Utterson, for he was undemonstrative at the best, and even his friendship seemed to be founded in a similar catholicity, I've got that wrong as well, of good nature. It is the mark of a modest man to accept his friendly circle ready-made from the hands of opportunity, and that was the lawyer's way. His friends were those of his own blood, or those whom he had known the longest. His affections, like ivy, were the growth of time. They implied no aptness in the object. Hence, no doubt, the bond that united him to Mr. Richard Enfield, his distant kinsman, the well-known man about town. It was a nut to crack for many. What these two could see in each other, or what subject they could find in common. It was reported by those who encountered them in their Sunday walks that they said nothing, looked singularly dull, and would hail with obvious relief the appearance of a friend. For all that, the two men put the greatest store by these excursions, counted them the chief jewel of each week, and not only set aside occasions of pleasure, but even resisted the calls of business, that they might enjoy them uninterrupted. It chanced on one of these rambles that their way led them down a by-street in a busy quarter of London. The street was small and what is called quiet, but it drove a thriving trade on the weekends. The inhabitants were all doing well, it seemed, and all emulously hoping to do better still, and laying out the surplus of their gains in coquetry, so that the shop fronts stood along the thoroughfare with an air of invitation, like rows of smiling saleswomen. Even on Sunday, when it veiled its more florid charms and lay comparatively empty of passage, the street shone out in contrast to its dingy neighbourhood. like a fire in a forest, and with its freshly painted shutters, well-polished brasses, and general cleanliness and gaiety of note, instantly caught and pleased the eye of the passenger. The doors from one corner on the left hand going east, the line was two doors from one corner on the left hand going east, the line was broken by the entry of a court, and just at that point a certain sinister block of building thrust forward its gable onto the street. It was 2 stories high, showed no window, nothing but a door on the lower story and a blind forehead of discoloured wall on the upper, and bore in every feature the marks of prolonged and sordid negligence. The door, which was equipped with neither bell nor knocker, was blistered and disdained. Tramps slouched into the recess and struck matches on its panels. Children kept shop upon the steps, and the schoolboy had tried his knife on the mouldings, and for close on a generation, no one had appeared to drive away these random visitors or to repair their ravages. Mr. Enfield and the lawyer were on the other side of the by-street, but when they came abreast of the entry, the former lifted up his cane and pointed. "Did you ever remark that door?" he asked. And when his companion had replied in the affirmative, "It is connected, in my mind," he added, "with a very odd story." "Indeed," said Mr. Utterson, with a slight change of voice. "And what was that?" "Well, it was this way," returned Mr. Enfield. "I was coming home from some place at the end of the world, about 3 o'clock of a black winter morning, and my way lay through a part of town where there was literally nothing to be seen but lamps, street after street, and all the folks asleep. Street after street, all lighted up as if for a procession, and all as empty as a church. Till at last I got into that state of mind when a man listens and listens and begins to long for the sight of a policeman. All at once I saw 2 figures, one a little man who was stumping along eastward at a good walk, and the other a girl of maybe 8 or 10, who was running as hard as she was able to down at the cross street. Well, sir, the 2 ran into one another naturally enough at the corner, and then came the horrible part of the thing. For the man trampled calmly over the child's body and left her screaming on the ground. It sounds nothing to hear, but it was hellish to see. It wasn't like a man. It was like some damned juggernaut. I gave a view halloo, took to my heels, collared my gentleman, and brought him back to where there was already quite a group about the screaming child. He was perfectly cool and made no resistance, but gave me one look so ugly that it brought out the sweat on me like running. The people who had turned out were the girl's own family, and pretty soon the doctor for whom she had been sent put in his appearance. Well, the child was not much the worse, more frightened according to the sawbones, and there you might have supposed would be an end to it. But there was one curious circumstance. I had taken a loathing to my gentleman at first sight. So had the child's family, which was only natural. But the doctor's case was what struck me. He was the usual cut and dry apothecary of no particular age and colour, with a strong Edinburgh accent and about as emotional as a bagpipe. Well, sir, he was like the rest of us. Every time he looked at my prisoner, I saw that the sawbones turned sick and white with the desire to kill him. I knew what was on his mind, just as he knew what was in mine. And killing being out of the question, we did the next best. We told the man, "We could and would make such a scandal out of this as should make his name stink from one end of London to the other. If he had any friends or any credit, we undertook that he should lose them. And all the time, as we were pitching it in red hot, we were keeping the women off him as best we could, for they were as wild as harpies. I never saw a circle of such hateful faces, and there was a man in the middle with a kind of black, sneering coolness. Frightened too, I could see that, but carrying it off, sir, really like Satan. If you choose to make a capital out of this accident, said he, I am naturally helpless. No gentleman but wishes to avoid a scene, says he. Name your figure. Well, we screwed him up to £100 for the child's family. He would have clearly liked to stick out, but there was something about the lot of us that meant mischief. And at last he struck. The next thing was to get the money. And where do you think he carried us but to the place with the door? Whipped out a key, went in, and presently came back with the matter of £10 in gold and a cheque for the balance on Coots, drawn payable to the bearer and signed with a name that I can't mention, though it's one of the points of my story. But it was the name at least very well known and often printed. The figure was stiff, but the signature was good for more than that, if it was only genuine. I took the liberty of pointing out to my gentleman that the whole business looked apocryphal. Some words always get me. And that a man does not in real life walk into a cellar door at 4 a.m. and come out of it with another man's cheque for close upon £100. But he was quite easy in sneering. Set your mind at rest, says he. I will stay with you till the bank opens and cash the cheque myself. So we all set off, the doctor, the child's father, and our friend and myself, and passed the rest of the night in the chambers. The next day, when we had breakfasted, we went in a body to the bank. I gave in the cheque myself and said I had every reason to believe it was a forgery. Not a bit of it. The cheque was genuine. Tut, tut, said Mr. Utterson. I see you feel as I do, Mr. Enfield. Yes, it's a bad story, for my man was a fellow that nobody could have to do with, a really damnable man, and the person that drew the cheque is the very pink of the properties, celebrated too, and, what makes it worse, one of your fellows who do what they call good. Blackmail, I suppose. An honest man paying through the nose for some of the capers of his youth. Blackmail House is what I call that place with the door, in consequence. Though even that, you know, is far from explaining all, he added, and with the words fell into a vein of musing. From this, he was recalled by Mr. Utterson, asking rather suddenly, and you don't know if the drawer of the cheque lives there? A likely place, isn't it? Returned Mr. Enfield, but I happen to have noticed his address. He lives in some square or other. And you never asked about the place with the door? Said Mr. Utterson. No, sir. I had a delicacy, was the reply. I feel very strongly about putting questions. It partakes too much of the style of the Day of Judgment. You start a question, and it's like starting a stone. You sit quietly on the top of a hill, and away the stone goes, starting others, and presently some bland old bird, the last you would have thought of, is knocked on the head in his way back in his own back garden, and the family have to change their name. No, sir, I make it a rule of mine. The more it looks like Queer Street, the less I ask. A very good rule, too, said the lawyer. But I have studied the place for myself, continued Mr. Enfield. It seems scarcely a house. There is no other door, and nobody goes in or out of that one but once in a great while. the gentleman of my adventure. There are 3 windows looking on the court on the first floor, none below. The windows are always shut, but they're clean. And then there is a chimney which is generally smoking, so somebody must live there. And yet, it's not so sure, for the buildings are so packed together about that court that it's hard to say where one ends and the other begins. The pair walked on again for a while in silence, and then, "Enfield," said Mr. Utterson, "that's a good rule of yours." "Yes, I think it is," returned Enfield. "And for all that," continued the lawyer, "there's one point I want to ask. I want to ask the name of that man who walked over the child." "Well," said Mr. Enfield, "I can't see what harm it would do. It was a man of the name of Hyde." Said Mr. Utterson. "What sort of man is he to see?" "He is not easy to describe. There is something wrong with his appearance, something displeasing, something downright detestable. I never saw a man I so disliked, and yet I scarce know why. He must be deformed somewhere. He gives a strong feeling of deformity, although I couldn't specify the point. He's an extraordinary-looking man, and yet I really can name nothing out of the way. No, sir, I can make no hand of it. I can't describe him, and it's not want of memory, for I declare I can see him this moment." Mr. Utterson again walked some way in silence, and obviously under a weight of consideration. "You are sure he used a key?" he inquired at last. "My dear sir," began Enfield, surprised out of himself. "Yes, I know," said Utterson. "I know it must seem strange. The fact is, if I do not ask you the name of the other party, it is because I know it already. You see, Richard, your tale has gone home. If you have been inexact in my point, you had better correct it." "I think you might have warned me," returned the other with a touch of sullenness, "but I have been pedantically exact, as you call it. The fellow had a key, and what's more, he has it still. I saw him use it not a week ago." Mr. Utterson sighed deeply, but said never a word, and the young man presently resumed. "Here is another lesson to say nothing," said he. "I am ashamed of my long tongue. Let us make a bargain never to refer to this again." "With all my heart," said the lawyer. "I shake hands on that, Richard." So that's chapter 1 of Jekyll and Hyde. Very badly written. Narrated, I may add. I think I actually really need to read this book again to get it to work. It's a wonderful book, but I've never actually read it out loud. And the punctuation's really, really fast and furious at times. The language is a little bit unusual for our tongues of this day, but hopefully you enjoyed that. And I promise I will improve on that for the next chapter, which I will read out to you again tomorrow. Drinks at Deacon Brodie's Tavern on me. Yes, Sherry. This book is actually was inspired by a very famous Edinburgh character, William Deacon Brodie, or Deacon William Brodie, should I say. I always get that the wrong way around, who basically was a wonderful character, but lived a life of duplicity. And basically Stevenson took reference from that and created this fabulous book. But anyway, folks, thank you for joining those that have joined. I promise I will hone up my reading skills or reading out loud skills, because that was a little bit harder than I thought it would be, considering I do storytelling for a living every day. That was a challenge, so I'll make sure I do it better the next time. But anyway, folks, have a lovely day, and I'll see you all tomorrow with chapter 2 of Jekyll and Hyde.